Okay, so this is the Field Study Lecture Series. It's a chance for us to hear from former students of BYU who have gone on field studies, hear about their experiences that they had through the program here at BYU, but also hear about what they've been doing since and how their field study experience has contributed to grad school or to their career or whatever it may be. Our speaker today, Loryn Anderson, was involved with the India Field Study Program. She went in 2000, 2001. Back in those days, the programs were a little bit longer than they are now, so she's altogether had about a year of time in India. She was an international studies major while she was here at BYU. Since then, she was involved in Teach for America in New York City and also got a master's degree, a master's of education, while she was in New York. And right now she's a candidate for a second master's degree at Harvard Graduate School of Education and getting her license to be a principal. And we'll just let her fill in more about all that. One thing I do want to say is that we are recording this lecture, and so when it comes time for question and answers, we'll be running a microphone around, and just would ask that you wait for it to get to you so we can record your question as well as the answer. So join with me in welcoming Loryn Anderson.
Good afternoon. I didn't know really much about this. I didn't know how many people would be coming today, so I feel a little funny reading a talk, but I'm also not a very good speaker, so if you'll just forgive the fact that I am going to refer to my notes, and I'm trying not to have it be very formal because there are not that many of you here, but I am going to read, and I apologize for that. Another thing is that I am getting my master's in Boston, and I don't have anything with me there other than clothes and books, so I didn't have my India pictures or some of my research, which is at home in Florida. So these pictures are from the internet, but I thought you should have an idea of what India looked like in case you haven't been. And they're just looped, so I just wanted to give you a heads up with that. Can I have a raise of hands of those who have been on field studies before? Okay, and Allison, you were in India. Okay, how many are considering going? Good, okay, then I hope this is relevant to you. Okay. I believe in the powerful transformations that can occur from traveling and from reflection. I believe in listening, asking questions, knowing that answers need not be their destinations. I believe in India, a country with over 1 billion people, 70% of whom live rurally in villages, a place with sadhus, painted elephants, monkeys, and home to the Taj Mahal, Bollywood, and the Himalayas. But mostly I believe in field studies, because it's education as it should be in its highest form. John Dewey, an American philosopher and social thinker in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, who really affected education, claims that schools could foster adventure and that schools could harmonize real experience and academic learning. No longer would boring, rote, formal instruction have to occur. So long, Dewey claimed, as teachers be mental mountaineers, finding bridges between innocent curiosity and the great store of human knowledge. Up until this point, the real teachers in this tradition were the learners themselves. Unfortunately for us as students, this notion really never took off. Education, as most of us know, isn't always an adventure. It sort of depends on our interests as students and the quality and interest of the teacher, unless you go on a field study. And instead of depending on the teacher for adventure, which is never a given, you create your own adventure depending on your interest. For all intents and purposes, you become your own teacher. It's an empowering experience. So empowering that I ended up going to India twice. Before I went on a field study, I had switched majors 3 times. I think I was like biology and Latin, and I didn't really have much of a direction to my life. I came from a high school where I worked really hard in all my classes and made pretty good grades. And I came to BYU and I worked sort of hard enough to get B's and maybe a C or 2. I didn't have a lot of direction. I didn't really know where I wanted to go. My roommate was thinking of going on a field study to Tanzania, and that was the first time I'd heard of field studies in the field study program. So I sort of started to hang out at the Kennedy Center. Is that what they call that still here? The Kennedy Center. and tried to see and talk with Dave Schuler as much as possible. And that influenced my decision to want to go on a field study. So initially I thought I would go to South Africa, and I took the field study prep class. And when I applied to go on a field study, I talked with both Dave and Shahram, and they told me that I should probably wait until my junior year, which is probably the best advice they gave me up until that point, because I decided I'd rather go to India because I really liked the idea of living in a village, and I was really intrigued by the caste system. So India I went, and it was my first international experience. Let me just give you an overview of the India field study experience in case you're not aware, and I think it's changed slightly since then. But and when you first go to India, you usually end up in Chennai, and you go to a village where BYU students have been going for 15 years or so, a really long time, and they're used to white people coming there. Generally, the group stays there for about 2 months, and that's where people do their field study research. Some people go into Coimbatore, which is the nearest urban center, or some people study at Shanti Ashram, which is an ashram nearby where they do lots of positive work for the community. And we stay with a family that Dave Schuler has known for 20 years probably. And their names are Matthew and Jiva, and they have 2 children, Edwin and Priya, who are probably 11 and 13. Is that right? Probably 11 and 13 right now. And it's a wonderful family, and living in a village is probably the best experience that you could ever have, or at least it was for me. After you stay in the village for about 2 months and you finish the bulk of your research, then you go on a world religions tour, and most people take the world religions class or course contract, where you travel all over India, because India is the home to Hinduism and Sikhism and Jainism, and also has a large population of Buddhists and Muslims there. So we study that for a little bit, and we do lots of interviews, and we read lots of religious texts, and it's also a very good way to experience India, as India tends to be a very religious country. Most people would be considered devout if they were here. After that, and we do that for about a month and a half, 2 months. And after that, a few of us stay in Mussoorie, which is the hill station above Delhi. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas. It's beautiful. And you have the opportunity to study Hindi there. So I studied 2 months of Hindi, like 3 hours a day. I had Hindi language classes. That's sort of an overview. I want to tell you about 2 people I met and how the experiences I had with them have influenced my life and continue to influence my life. And then I want to tell you about an Indian phenomenon that helped me to understand India. The first person I'm going to tell you about is from the village, and her name is Salomini. Salomini lives next to Matthew and Jiva, the 2 people that we stay with, the family we stay with. She lives in a mud hut with a thatched roof. Her house was maybe 100 square feet. And although she could stand up straight in it, I couldn't. In her house, she had a chest with her clothes and some dishes in it. She had a small plastic stool on which she often sat, a 1-burner portable gas stove, a few pots hanging from an inside part of the roof, and a mat that she used as a bed, but she rolled up during the day. Her possessions in her house were pretty much on par with the rest of the majority of the village. Since she lived right next to Matthew and Jiva and we shared the same water tap, I would see Salomini often. She didn't always work. She would pick tomatoes from a tomato farm close by, and I never figured out her schedule. I don't think she worked all the time. I think she worked when she needed to, when she needed money. She didn't have any children, and she did not have a husband who lived there all the time. I saw him very occasionally. And the reason I'm so fuzzy about these details is because Salomini spoke no English, and I spoke no Tamil except for hello and thank you, which was just an effort at being polite. But Salomini and I became friends, and it all started over laundry. There's this flat rock in between Jiva and Matthew's house where we stayed, and Salomini's house next door, and this is where laundry is done. You sort of fill up your buckets, put soap in the bucket, and let your clothes soak for a little bit, then you bang your clothes on a rock. And the village women could get stains out, their clothes would smell and look nice, but that didn't happen with the BYU students. Our clothes never really looked nice. We had stains all over them. We just couldn't effectively clean our clothes on a rock. Well, one day Salomone was cleaning her clothes, and one of my facilitators, Blaine, started to clean his clothes next to her. And Salomone sort of ran over to him and essentially just shooed him away because he wasn't doing it correctly. And I was a little offended because I had just cleaned my clothes and Salomone had seen me do them and didn't say anything except was laughing hysterically because I was attempting to clean clothes. So after Blaine walked away from the rock, leaving his clothes there to be cleaned by Salomone, I went over there and kind of gave her the, like, what's up with that look, even though I probably even might have said something like that, even though she couldn't understand me. And she just kind of smiled and continued cleaning his clothes. And even though I brought my clothes over there and wanted her to clean them too, she didn't because, I mean, that's a very typical Indian role. Men shouldn't be required to clean clothes. So even the BYU students didn't. And it all sort of started over a joke, and I understood that. It was my role to clean clothes, and I wasn't really mad at her. And I probably wouldn't have sort of gone up to her and laughed with her or joked with her had she not been someone I knew or someone that was familiar with the BYU students coming there. But it was the beginning of our friendship. And other than our experiences at the water tap and over laundry, I didn't see her much the first time I was there because I was doing my research in Coimbatore and we couldn't communicate, and that was a little awkward for me. So that was sort of the end of our friendship, I guess. And then I came back to India the second time. And there's no phone or email to allow people like Matthew and Jiva to know that we were coming. So we just sort of arrived. And I remember I went with Emily, who was the other facilitator with me. And we went a few weeks earlier than everyone else. And we walked into the village, and Salomone was there. And in India, when you're loved a lot, or if you're a child who's really cute, your cheeks get pinched a lot. And it's a form of love. The harder your cheek is pinched, the more loved you are. And it's done mostly with kids. It's kind of like the equivalent of like maybe a bear hug. You know, you wouldn't do that to a child, but I mean, it's just showing your affection towards someone if they pinch their cheek. I remember coming back and seeing Salomone, and she didn't know I was coming. And we were so excited to see each other that she pinched my cheek so hard that it was sore the next day. And so, I mean, after that sort of beginning again, I would often just go sit with her in her house while she was cooking, or I would do laundry with her even though I did my own, or I would just sit with her in front of, she would be squatting in front of her house, and I would just kind of sit there too and watch the village go by. And we couldn't say anything. We just sort of sat in silence, happy for our friendship with each other. And we tried to use a lot of hand gestures because I wanted to know so much about her because I felt such an affinity towards her. We really just seemed to get along despite the fact that we couldn't say anything. And I remember one time he became so frustrated and she just kept speaking Tamil louder and more slowly as if I could understand it that way. And I finally just said to her, I said, and I said something like that sounded like Tamil to me because Tamil has lots of K's in it. And she laughed so hard, and then she said, grr, 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 which I'm assuming was the way that she thought English sounded. And I had never heard English the way it sounded to someone who didn't speak it before. I don't really have a salient moment with her that defined my field study experience. But knowing her and knowing that she lives in this village that's on the other side of the world, and knowing that her life and my life look very different, and that her life has no bearing on mine other than our friendship is really humbling to me. And I don't know how to describe it other than that. But sometimes if my life gets a little frustrating or overwhelming, which it always does, right? I can think of Salomone, and I have a great picture for that I wish I could show you, but it's probably in transit to Boston right now. But anyway, that's one of my experiences. The second experience I want to share with you is about a Sikh man. And like I said, part of the World Religions Tour, we interview people. And one of the people I interviewed was a Sikh man in Missouri. And he lived at the Gurdwara there, one of the Gurdwaras. Gurdwara is a Sikh temple where Sikhs worship. He was a Ragi, who is someone who sings the religious text. And in exchange for his services to the temple, he received room and board. So he lived at the temple, at the Gurdwara. And I would go to the Gurdwara often because I lived in Missouri and, didn't always have stuff to do. So I'd go to the Gurdwara, and we ended up talking quite a few times. And he was a 60-year-old man who in 1984 lost his wife and 2 children in Operation Blue Star. In case you don't know what Operation Blue Star is, and I didn't know until I lived in India, Operation Blue Star was an Indian military operation that was ordered by Indira Gandhi, who was then the Prime Minister of India, to remove Sikh militants from the Golden Temple in Amritsar. They had sort of established a stronghold there, and the Golden Temple is the holiest Gurdwara in India, probably in the world, and it's beautiful. It really is a golden temple. It's covered in gold. The Operation Blue Star was launched in response to basically a breakdown in law in the Punjab, which is where there's a Sikh majority. And the operation was carried out by Indian Army troops with tanks and armored vehicles. 492 civilians and militants were killed, and 83 Indian troops were killed during that. It was 3 days, and the Golden Temple was desecrated. Although it was successful militarily, it is considered to be a political disaster and an unprecedented act in modern Indian history. The impact of it created tensions that even caused worldwide action against Sikhs. So it was a really horrible thing that occurred. And in India, many Sikhs even resigned from their civil and government posts, and they returned their awards that they had received because they felt so disenfranchised from the Indian government. So this man's wife and his 2 children were killed, and I'm assuming they were not militants. And I don't remember any of the details about the interview, and I wish I could look it up, but I don't have my journals because I mailed them home from India and they never came. Which, if you're ever going on a field study and you cherish your journals and your research, do not send it because you don't want to carry it anymore. So keep it with you. So I can't look up the details of the interview. But what I remember about this man is how highly he still spoke of India, how highly he still spoke of the Indian government, and just of people in general. I mean, he lost everything he loved, his wife and his 2 children, and he's a 60-year-old man, and he had to live at the Gurdwara. And I'm sure that he didn't live at a Gurdwara before that. But he was still full of love and was very willing to talk with me about Sikhism and India in general, and had love in his heart. And again, I don't have another moment, or I can't tell you the lesson I learned from that man, but I can just recall him when I'm remembering someone who wronged me or who hurt me, and I can think of this man who had been wronged and hurt seriously and was still full of love. The last experience I want to share with you is about an Indian phenomenon. And this phenomenon is that there are not a lot of lines in India. People don't queue up or line up to buy train tickets, to go to a movie. It's sort of a crowd. And you just have to push yourself through to get a ticket. So the first time I went to buy a train ticket, I was in Coimbatore, and I hadn't been in India too long, maybe a month and a half. And I forget where I was buying a ticket to. But there were 3 or 4 ticket windows, and only one was open. And there were 3 men standing in front of it, and I thought all 3 men were together because they were standing right there at the window together. Well, it was actually 3 separate people buying 3 separate tickets. But you sort of just kind of push your way through when there's no line. Well, I kept thinking that, I was waiting behind them, and I kept thinking that they would finish and move on. Well, people kept cutting in front of me. One after another would cut in front of me, and I kept thinking, eventually someone's going to notice that I'm just standing here waiting to buy a ticket, and someone will politely say, go ahead. Or I was thinking that, Indians would realize that a line is the way to do it and everyone would get a ticket. But that didn't actually happen, and I had to, cut my way through. And I was disturbed by it because I felt like, why can't everyone just wait in line and buy their ticket? Why is it such a big deal that you have to push in front of somebody else? And I bought tickets numerous times, and I would get in a really bad mood after I left. It's sort of probably like living in New York. There are things that you don't want to do, but you have to because there are so many people who live there. It's the same thing in India. And I would leave after buying tickets in a bad mood, but that's not how the majority of Indians seemed to feel. Like if you go and you elbow your way through or you step on someone's foot, it's not really a big deal. I'm not doing it belligerently or deliberately. But that's the way that I always saw it, because you have to fight your way to get a ticket, and that's not how it's done here. And I think that the line is a classic example of how people create social order out of chaos. But in India, where there are over 1 billion people and not enough resources to go around, waiting in line doesn't always get you what you need, like it does here. So self-interest trumps the need for social order. And I began to see social order sort of as a luxury that we have here that's not necessarily over there. So while I was still in a bad mood after elbowing others to get my train ticket, in my understanding, and it took me a while to kind of put two and two together and not be so angry after trying to get a ticket, I was not as quick to give a dirty look to the person trying to get a train ticket next to me, because waiting in line long enough still might not get you what you need. In going on a field study, you have the opportunity to sit down with others, including those with whom you're studying, and just ask questions. We often don't take that same opportunity here. We have different priorities. A field study allows you the luxury of not having other priorities that would get in the way. As a teacher, I wish for my students that their education was an adventure too. I wish for my students that they have the opportunity to do what I did, to spend a year of their life living in a place where your classroom really is all around you. I had to travel halfway around the world to learn that I love learning, and I found subjects and took classes about things that I really did care about. I made A's after my India experience when I came back here. And it's not that I knew what I wanted to do with my life, it's that I just appreciated things so much more. When I came back from India, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I approached life with more fervor. During my time in India, I decided that even though I didn't know what profession I wanted when I grew up, I knew I wanted to develop some aspect of the United States. I felt as if I had more authority here to fight for social justice. So I worked at an AmeriCorps program as a caseworker in Baltimore. I worked with the Department of Juvenile Justice to help kids who had recently been adjudicated and were either on probation or had just gotten off probation. And I remember when I was applying to this job, I was still here at BYU, and I had to write an essay about how my previous experiences would help me as a caseworker in inner city Baltimore. And I remember talking with Dave Schuler about this. And I said, Dave, I have no idea how my previous experiences, what they have to do with being a caseworker in Baltimore. And I think he almost was upset, and he looked a little flabbergasted. He said, are you kidding? And I said, I don't really know what being at BYU and going on a field study has to do with working with juvenile delinquents. And he said, well, how much do you know about inner city youth who are having trouble with the law? And I didn't know anything about that. All I have is a desire to do something worthwhile where I feel as if I'm helping someone lead a better life. But think of your experiences in India, he said. Your experiences in Baltimore may create as much culture shock, if not more, than your experiences in India, which is very true. There you were able to negotiate the cultural differences, make sense of them, and then complete research in spite of those differences. No small feat. And one that has prepared you to work in different settings and in different cultures here in the U.S. Well, he was right. From Baltimore, I applied to Teach for America, again working in a different culture. There were two different cultures there that I had to negotiate. One was the culture of schooling. I had never been a teacher before, and schools in New York City and the Bronx look very different than the schools that I went to growing up. So that was one culture that I had to negotiate. And then the second culture was the students with whom I worked. And they were very different, most of them. My first year was horrible. I taught kids who were first-generation Americans, most of them, and they had been retained from the year before, and most of them are English language learners. And, of course, I was given these children, and I didn't have any experience teaching. But I'm convinced I would have quit had I not had the experiences I had in India to be able to help me understand working with different cultures and understand where my students were coming from. That knowledge allowed me to continue teaching. I moved to Florida. I taught there. That's where I'm from, so I just moved back home. And I continued to work there with students who were also first-generation Americans, cultures that were very different from mine. And now I've decided that I want to be in school administration, so I'm going to school to get my principal licensure now. And I'm taking a class called School Reform, in which we talk about why schools are the way they are and why efforts at reform have basically been unsuccessful. There are many reasons why. That's why I'm taking a whole class on it. But one of the biggest aspects of why school reform has failed is cultural. I want to read a quote from one of my readings in class. Cultural activities are historically evolved solutions to adaptive challenges. They were constructed over time through collaborative human effort to achieve a stable daily routine. Changes in cultural activities are made slowly, gradually, and are built on existing routines. Because we all went to school growing up and have ideas about what schooling should look like and what its purpose is, efforts to reform schools have been superficial at best, and in many cases have failed due to the cultural nature of schooling. Well, I'm still not sure what I want to do when I grow up. I'm going to be a principal, hopefully soon. And I want to be a principal because I want to affect greater change in the classroom. And how I hope to do that stems in part from my adventurous education that was my experience in India. For my future students and my previous students, I want my school to be so exhilaratingly exciting that students want to be there, not merely because it will prepare them for their future, but because they thirst for knowledge and they wonder at the complexities of the world. I want what a school reformer wants when he says, I want them to be perplexed by what they have considered, conscious that they have managed but a glimpse of the depths that surge below. He continues, to be educated is to know what depths await us underneath the surface of things, whatever those things may be. If we shield our children from life's inevitable perplexities, we leave them at the mercy of ignorance and deny them the wonder that is the basis of everything we know. That is what my field study experiences in India gave to me, wonder and knowledge of the depths below that await me. That's it. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm curious about your philosophy of reform in the schools that you've kind of discussed at the end of your speech here, and I wonder if you can give some concrete ideas of how what type of procedures or programs need to be implemented to reform
education.
Sure.
I mean, I feel slightly unprepared, but sure.
From your personal point of view.
Yeah, definitely professional development. The greatest effect on student achievement is the quality of teachers in a classroom. So if teachers aren't prepared, then students can't achieve academically. So professional development is huge, and not just professional development in terms of teachers go to a workshop and they sit there for 2 hours and then go back and, they've learned everything on differentiated instruction or something. It's professional development that includes a coach who's, there all the time who can support teachers. Professional development that includes collaboration. I mean, teachers have notoriously been autonomous, and no teacher wants to give that up, and it's so cultural. How many of you knew teachers growing up that had, that collaborated with other teachers? And probably very few of you, because that's not how school has ever been. And, you shut your door and it's your class, right? But until teachers are held accountable for what they're doing, then I don't think students will achieve academically even more than they are now. So professional development.